There are 4 steps for calculating the IBI score or Index for Biological Integrity. We use this score to come up with a health rating for the creek. In this example, you can see that we counted the total number of each organism that we found in our sample. The first step for calculating the IBI score is to determine how many total organisms were in the entire sample. That means we add up every organism, 6 plus 4 plus 10 plus 15 plus 8 plus 100 plus 160. That gives us 303 total organisms in our sample. The next step is to figure out the percent abundance. Basically, what percent is each type of organism? 6 small minnow mayflies is what percent of 303 total organisms? 100 midges is what percent out of 303 total organisms? When we do that math, 6 divided by 303 times 100 to get the percent, or 4 divided by 303 times 100 to get the percent, we end up with these values. These values are important for determining the S value, or S score. To figure out the S value, we use the S value matrix. And the S value matrix works pretty much like a multiplication table, where you find where certain things intersect. If you were looking at category 1 insects, like small minnow mayflies, you would look in the category 1 row. But if you're looking at midges, you look at the category 3 row. Next, we use the percent abundance to determine if the population or the sample of those organisms are rare, common, or dominant. In our example of small minnow mayfly, 6 divided by 303 times 100 is 1.98%. So about 2%, which is less than 5%. So I go to this column, less than 5%. The small minnow mayfly is a category 1 organism. So that means that the S value for the small minnow mayfly is 3. If we did the same thing with the midge fly, it is 33% of the sample and a category 3 organism. So category 3, more than 25%, it gets an S score of 0. And this makes sense because, as we've learned, when we have more pollution-resistant organisms, our scores are lower. If we had more organisms here, we'd be adding in higher numbers like 3s, 5s, and 4s, and that would give us a higher IBI score. Once we get all of the S values, we are ready to calculate the IBI score. The IBI score is basically the sum of all the S values. We add 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 0 plus 0, and that gives us a total of 12. That 12 is our IBI score. Now that you know how to calculate the IBI score in 4 steps of adding up the total number of organisms, calculating percent abundance, identifying the S value, and adding the S values up, you are going to do some calculations yourself. You get to skip steps 1 and 2 and focus on calculating the S value and the IBI score. The next Nearpod slide is going to have a link that opens up to a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is going to look like this. You won't be able to make any edits to the spreadsheet itself because we don't want any of the data accidentally getting changed. So what you have to do is click File, make a copy, name the file, maybe put your initials or something at the end, and save it in your class folder on your school Google Drive. Once you've done that, you'll have a version that you can fully change. I recommend that you open up the spreadsheet in a different window so that you have the Nearpod in one tab and the spreadsheet in another. Notice how the total number of organisms is already calculated for you, as is the percent abundance. Now you just need to use the S-value matrix to figure out the S scores. And that S-value matrix is going to be available on the next slide, so make sure you have the spreadsheet open in a separate window. In my example here, notice how the S score has already calculated and it's updated the IBI score. After you have entered the S score for all 3 categories of organisms, refer to the IBI score and go back to the Nearpod to the next slide past the matrix in order to answer the questions that follow.